To what extent do the panel agree or disagree that HS2 is a total waste of money and an environmental disaster?
Right. So, judging from the way you phrased that question, Paul, I'd imagine you do think it's a total waste of an environmental disaster. And as we know, a section of it is now being delayed for 2 years. We're told that will save money. John?
Yeah, I think it's a question of priority. My own view is, and talking to people in this part of the world and also on the other side of the Pennines, that the real priority is improving regional transport within regions so that... and I think we've missed out. I think the North West, Yorkshire and so on have missed out on that big time. As far as HS2 is concerned, I think there is an argument for it, which is to do with capacity. But I'm not sure that actually being able to get from London to Manchester, and even less so from Manchester to London, 20 minutes quicker or whatever it is necessarily a great thing for mankind. So my personal view is probably that maybe we shouldn't have done this. Now that it's half built, I think there are some very difficult arguments about whether and how to complete it, which I think are probably going to end up on the laps of the next government rather than this government. I think this has been kicked down the road for a couple of years.
Yes, and this 2-year delay, and we've been told that's because construction costs are rising and there's a 2-year delay, hopefully that will save costs. Will it save costs, do you think?
I would love to understand why, if construction costs are rising, they're actually going to start falling again after 2 years. I suspect this is about postponing expenditure now, and I was debating earlier with one of the other members of the panel whether this being delayed means, in effect, it may never be restarted or not. And we'll find out in due course, I guess. But I think we really should be getting focused on getting transport right for the people who live in this part of the world and other parts of the world, and that this intra-regional, as well as inter-regional connectivity is really important. And I wish more money was going into that, and I'd like to encourage the government or the next government, whichever it is, to give that a major priority.
Okay. So, Finn, I should say, incidentally, you very kindly stood in at the last minute because we had a government minister coming on this evening and for entirely legitimate personal reasons couldn't come. So, Ben, we're grateful to you. So, in terms of what John's saying there, this 2-year delay, how on earth does it save money? Or is it just kicking it into the long grass?
Well, there are two things. The first is I think we shouldn't have to make a choice between HS2 and better rail connections within the northern parts of the country. Right?
But every time I come to this part of the country, people in the audience say that's exactly what is happening. Is that fair?
Right. So that's why I said we shouldn't have to make a choice between... We need to do both. In relation to the HS2 scheme itself...
When you say we need to do both, that isn't what's actually happening, though.
So as we come to the HS2 scheme itself, it's clear that this is not a well-conceived scheme. Any scheme that lasts as long as it has, with the costs going up as they have, is not a scheme that is fit for purpose. A 2-year delay can help potentially improve that, but it will really depend on the detail of exactly what we're doing in those 2 years to make sure that we get the cost down and make it the scheme that really works.
So how will it get cost down?
Well, it would really depend on the very minute details of exactly how you're designing the scheme, the contractors you're using, the timeframes, how much it costs for you to buy the land, all sorts of details around it. But fundamentally, I think that it is wrong for us to say, let's just abandon HS2 that is already being built, but we've got to make sure we find a better way in this country of building massive infrastructure. Other parts of the world, per mile, when they build railway, it's so much cheaper than this country. We really need to look at what is wrong with how we are doing it. It's not a problem of intention. The Labour Party, when they're in office, wanted HS2. We pushed it forward, but we're not delivering these things properly. And I think
you've had quite a long time, just to point out the obvious.
I came into Parliament only 5 years ago.
I'm talking about the government.
Right, yeah.
Quite a long time to work out if you're doing it properly or not.
Well, it is clear. It is clear
Put down the speed. Put down the speed.
In all areas...
Keep going, Bin. Keep going. Come on.
We are not doing this very, very well because it is a really complicated, one of the biggest infrastructure schemes in the world. But we can do it because Crossrail get done. So I know we have the capacity to do it. We need to be able to do that in HS2 and across the north of other regions of the country to make sure we connect up our different regions, because unless we can get the cost of these things down, nobody will ever put forward doing major infrastructure again in this country, and that would be a shame. But let's not just say we shouldn't ever do big schemes.
Right. Not surprised, quite a few hands up on this one. I could have predicted that. First of all, the woman here in the pink top.
Hello. Yeah, I live in an area where multiple houses were under compulsory purchase because of the HS2 scheme. So there was enormous upset, which has actually caused ill health for a number of families, and families who live very close to me who have fallen victim to that. In addition to that, the infrastructure in order to get to the HS2 point to board the train is likely to actually take the amount of time, which is the difference in the shortened journey from where I live to London. So in terms of leaving the house and getting to London, the time of the journey isn't probably going to be very much different at all, and I'm literally talking 10 or 15 minutes.
I mean, one argument for HS2 is that it would increase capacity even if it doesn't shorten the time. Does that convince you at all?
I feel that we have a decent... Where we do have quality, I agree with the point that we actually can get from this part of the country to London relatively easily, regularly. The quality of the trains is sufficient.
There's a murmur of agreement with you there, I have to say.
The local networks, much less so, in terms of the quality of the trains, the regularity, the size, they're cramped. That's where the problem is.
OK. The woman in the black top there. Yes.
With reference to what John expressed with regards to local transport links, the size of Warrington now and the new houses that are being built, it's practically turning into a city. So how would John recommend the local transport links are improved? And I live in South Warrington, which doesn't really have the transport links out to Manchester or Liverpool, yet we do have 2 motorways on our doorstep. But there's part of Manchester's tram system, Altrincham, that ends not so far away, and if that was extended over to areas like Lymm, Thelwall, Stockton Heath, it would be so much of improvement to not just the environment, but the people's lives within those areas. But South Warrington gets nothing.
OK. And the man in front in the glasses. Yes.
Isn't the reason we don't get anything built and everything's overcost is because nobody wants it built in their backyard? I know it's bad to echo Tom Hardwood, but shouldn't we just build it?
Shouldn't you just build it? OK, yes, so you were saying the other week. Yes, and the woman there can you see the woman there with the red top and the long brown hair? Yes.
Thank you. I think, Bim, I agree with your statement, but you chose to do Crossrail, you chose to do HS2, you could have chosen to choose a connection between Liverpool and Leeds, you could have chosen to improve the network between Liverpool and Birmingham or Manchester and Birmingham, but you chose not to.
OK. Anne? So shall I just remind you, to what extent do you agree or disagree that HS2 is a total waste of money and an environmental disaster?
Yeah, I do. I'll just flesh that out a tiny bit. The question, why can't you just build it? I have some sympathy with the gentleman who asked that, because I have to say, we should also say that sometimes not everything we think is going to happen turns out the right way. Initially, I was quite a believer in HS2. I thought it would come from the northeast. I liked the idea that the north, whether it was the northwest or the northeast, putting aside any ancestral differences, would be more connected. I thought this would really sort of help power forward economies that were getting left behind. But, the project, to put it mildly, has let me down. And I think where we are now, we are throwing good money after bad. And you can see the problem with saying don't just stop doing infrastructure things, Bim, yes, I agree, as I also believed, but it is just out of control. And then it becomes a sort of put it off in order to not face up to the fact that something is quite profoundly wrong with what you started in the first place. And it really isn't working. The other thing I would say, our lives have changed a lot in that time. We now work a lot more happily remotely. we've also been through, we had to because of the pandemic, but that is going to hang around. So I suppose in my mind, I had everyone working on their laptops on these trains whizzing up and down the country. A lot of people don't want to work like that. They want to work more locally. They want to work and to be able to travel. And I completely agree with the lady here in the pink jacket, when she said, our problem is getting around locally and in the regions. It's often less what we thought it was, which is let's join these dots between the big cities. And final point, the Trans-Pennine experience. I mean, now, if I were to get from County Durham on the railways, it was Homer's Odyssey, isn't it? I mean, this is really where the North and the levelling up agenda needs to focus now. More regional devolution about these decisions, and I'm afraid HS2 is an expensive elephant, and, well, I don't want to say anything bad about elephants, but it's done. Stephen.
I think, firstly, when it comes to trains, we could probably do with the government getting around the table with the RMT and actually striking a deal in the first instance so that the trains that are pre-existing actually run on time. I think that would be a benefit to most folk. But when it comes to high-speed rail, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Japan was building high-speed rail before I was even born, and yet we can't even complete one single project on time. And from a Scottish perspective, this comes nowhere near Scotland. Where's the benefit for the rest of the UK from this project? There is none, particularly for my part of the world when we are completely detached from HS2. So I think the government really needs to consider what their priorities are in relation to this and whether they want to continue throwing billions after billions towards this project.